Hey crafters, it's Amanda. So today I'm going to do something I haven't done before, and I'm going to do a yarn review. And I think this is kind of a cool idea, especially for those of you who have just started, because I know for me, when I first started learning to crochet, I was really unsure about yarns and what was the right kind to buy, because I didn't want to make a mistake. I was afraid that I was going to buy something and it'd be the wrong yarn. And I understand that struggle as when you're first starting, it's definitely a struggle. But that's also one of the questions I get asked a lot by people. They'll say, what kind of yarn would you recommend for this? Or what kind of yarn do you recommend for starting? What kind of yarn should I use for a hat or for whatever the project is? And so I know in my first videos I recommend that you use Red Heart yarn because that's really easy to work with for beginners, and I definitely still recommend that yarn. That yarn has a lot of great uses. I don't use it for a ton of my projects, but there are very specific projects where I'm like, yep, I'm using Red Heart yarn. But once you get kind of beyond the learning curve, the learning stage, you're able to start branching out and trying different yarns, but it can still be really overwhelming because you might not quite understand, what do I want to use the yarn for, how do I decide, and plus, yarn's not always cheap, so you don't want to spend money on yarn that you're not going to use. So that's what you've got me here for. So I'm going to do a yarn review today on Lion Brand's Homespun yarns. This is probably one of my favorite yarns. The color I'm wanting here is Fiesta, and I've got a couple different colors of it here that I'll put the links in the description below. I just can't remember off the top of my head all their names. So this one, what I'm working on here, is a blanket. And I've actually been working on this for a really long time, and the only reason I've been working on it for so long is because I like to start a bunch of projects. There's more projects in the world than I can hope to crochet in my lifetime, but I sometimes think that, oh yeah, I'll just start another project. So you can see this blanket here that I'm making from this yarn. It's got a really cool variegation to it. So I'm doing this kind of like shells look, or these scallops. You kind of see all the little diamond shapes almost nestled against each other. And it's really cool because, you've got some purples and reds here, but then in this part of the blanket, it might be more greenish. And that's what I love about the homespun yarn, is the variegations. They're really cool. This one has a wide variety of colors in it. You can kind of see that, you look at the blanket, you're kind of like, it doesn't match, but it really does. So it's really cool. I also like this yarn because it's a thicker yarn. They recommend using a size K hook. For this blanket, I'm actually using a size N hook just to make the project work a little faster, and because this yarn is pretty thick, so I didn't want the blanket to be super dense, so using a little bit thicker of a hook helped with that. The reason I want to recommend this to someone who has just started, is learning, is because the yarn, the way this yarn is made, it's kind of got these fibers that aren't quite twisted. They're still kind of fluffy. And then it's got a thread wrapped around it. So you can kind of see, I'll get some closer shots, but it's kind of got this spiral view. And so if you use this hook that is too small, you risk doing what's called splitting the yarn. So if I was crocheting, I've got this size B hook. So this is really small. You would never use this for this yarn. But what you risk is, instead of looping around the yarn while you're crocheting, you risk doing what's called splitting the yarn, which is when the hook goes into the fibers of the yarn itself. So let me see if I can get this here. So you can kind of see that the hook, instead of being on the outside of the yarn, it's actually going through the fibers of the yarn, and that's called splitting the yarn, and you don't want that to happen because it'll make your works less even. So I want to recommend this to a beginner, but if you, when I say beginner, I mean someone who's literally just learning how to chain and how to single crochet. But if you're at the point now where you can, pretty comfortably crochet a single crochet or a double crochet, I would definitely recommend try branching out into this yarn. You can get some really cool textures with it. But if you are still on the newer end, use a larger, oh, here's my end hook. I found it. This is the hook I've been using for this blanket. You can see it's pretty chunky. And so I don't have to worry about it splitting the yarn, because obviously this big hook isn't going to go into the yarn. So this is one application of the yarn. I really like it for things that you're going to either be wearing or you're going to, be wrapped up in a blanket, because it's very soft. I love that about this yarn. It says homespun. It kind of has that good, you know, you're going to your grandparents' house, they've got those soft old blankets that are just worn in, you know, kind of cuddle up with them. So it's got that really good feel, and the variegations are really pretty. So that is Fiesta colored. Then there's this right here. This is something my sister is working on. She actually doesn't know that I'm using this right now. Hopefully she's okay with that. I'm not going to mind it all the way. I think she's going to make this into like a shawl where you make a big rectangle and then you sew it up a certain way. But you can see again here, this is another example of how you could use this yarn. And she's actually using a size K hook with it, which is what is recommended. But because this yarn can be pretty dense and fluffy, instead of working in every single spot, what she's doing is she's doing a double crochet and then a chain, and then a double crochet and then a chain to kind of give it a more airy kind of feel, so it's not too hot. You can also see as far as the variegation goes, this is a different skein. I'll unwind it so you can see the skein itself more. So whereas with the blanket it was kind of clustering the way the colors were, this one it's kind of more just your typical variegation, but it's really pretty because it seems to have this dominant blue color, but you can see the yellows and reds popping out really beautifully and contrasting that. And it's also, what's nice about this yarn is because it is a thicker yarn and you do use bigger hooks, it's a lot faster to work. You just make faster progress because each stitch is larger than if you were using really small crochet thread and a nitty bitty hook. So let me wind this back up and I'll show you some finished projects because those are both still in the works. I do actually know the color of this yarn. This is Mimosa. You may remember this hat from one of my other videos. I think I was talking about crocheting in the round. This was an example of a project you could do in the round. But I made a hat and a matching infinity scarf. But it might look pretty simple at first. The hat, I literally just did double crochet. I didn't really do anything fancy. I just added a little flower here. But because the yarn itself is so beautifully variegated and has so much texture and, you know, personality to it, that even just a simple hat looks really beautiful. And sometimes with this hat I'll cuff it, you know, so I kind of have a brim, do all kinds of things with it. But the yarn works really well for this, and it's a very nice, warm, thick hat. And here's the scarf that I made to match it. What's kind of cool about this scarf is because I was working in rows back and forth, the variegation almost gives it this like striped kind of chunky colored pattern. And when I worked this scarf, because I didn't want it to be too hot, because this is a pretty dense yarn, I went ahead and did this pattern that kind of gives it this airy texture in the middle, where you can see on the edges, it's kind of just solid double crochet. But then in the center you can kind of see more of these holes and things forming because of the pattern I was doing. And so that helped find a good balance with this yarn. And I just decided to make it into an infinity scarf just because. So really pretty colors. This is one of my favorite hat and scarf sets that I've made. And then I have one last scarf to show you, which is also one of my favorites. And for whatever reason I ended up making this one into an infinity scarf also. But this is another Lion Brand Homespun Yarn. This one, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it's really pretty. It's got these pinks and purples in it, and I'll look this up. I'll put the link in my description below so you know what color this is. But what I did for this one was I did a very simple kind of netting pattern to it where I just did chains and slip stitches. I'd work across chain some and kind of form these loops of chains, so I'd work across chain, slip stitch, chain, slip stitch, and just did that across in rows. So that way it's really light and airy. And I got a lot of distance and I got a lot of square footage, I guess, out of the yarn, so to speak. But it keeps it from being too hot when you're wearing it. And again, I love the variegations of this yarn. It's really, again, this one's pretty thick. But there's definitely ways, if you're concerned about how thick it is, you can definitely come up with ways to make it not so hot and still have the nice coziness and warmth of the scarf. And yeah, so that's all the projects I have with this yarn. This is Lion Brand Yarn's Homespun. And if you want to start branching out in different yarns, I would really recommend this one. I have been very happy with it. Like I said, you do want to use a larger hook probably because you don't want to split the yarn. But it's not the end of the world if you do split the yarn with this, because it's such a thick, kind of chunky, fuzzy yarn. If you do split the yarn, it usually blends in pretty well. Some other yarns like Red Heart, if you were to, you know, have little pulls on the yarn itself, it might show up more in your work. But with this yarn, because it's so fuzzy, it kind of just blends in together really well, so that way you don't have to worry about that too much. And it's really not that hard to work with once you get the hang of it. It might feel different going from a yarn like Red Heart, but just grab a chunky hook. Also, another idea I'll mention real quick before I end is I've been using an N hook for this, but hooks go crazy big. This one, I had it written on here. I think this one's a P, this one's a Q, and this is an S. I'm kind of wanting to try using maybe this Q on this yarn because it's thick enough that it would kind of fluff in and fill in the gaps that, you know, would be left from using such a large hook. But I think it might give a really cool texture. You know, maybe help create something like this, but I could do different stitches. So that's just some ideas of what you can do with this yarn and a couple of the reasons why I like it. So if you're looking for a new yarn to try and you want something softer like you're going to wear, like a hat or a scarf or a blanket, anything really, then I would definitely recommend this yarn. So if you try this yarn, comment below and tell me what you think of it, and also tell me if you like this kind of a video, if you like a yarn review, and I'll do a couple more of these. I've got a bunch of yarns that are, I say I have favorite yarns, but it's kind of not fair to say they're my favorite yarn because I have so many that are my favorite. That kind of, you know, doesn't make sense to say it's my favorite, but I have like 30 favorites. So we'll just say that it's yarns I really like and recommend. But there you go. This is Lion Brand's Homespun Yarn. See you next time, and happy crafting!